Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an assortment of just absolutely terrifying experiences. Really quick, I did spend about an hour last night talking to the North Carolina State Trooper who witnessed a helicopter crash around the East Dismal Swamp region in North Carolina, where he witnessed soldiers as well as two what we know as werewolves on this channel come out of the helicopter, and he wants to wait at least one more day before he shares any information. Once again, he's retired, but he just wants to make sure that no repercussions will come about. Just trying to be safe, and I can't blame him, with everything going on and people being silenced and researchers passing away strangely. I can't blame him. So today's upload is going to be pretty awesome, some terrifying experiences, but before we get into that, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? Today's first encounter. It is from a desire to understand that I share my experience, not to be analyzed by the learned people of science, but to find others who have had similar experiences, especially in the region of the Sierra Nevada mountains on the border of California and Nevada. Just a little background on myself. I am a very successful technician in the world of broadcast. My eyes are my greatest tool for accuracy and detail. I am an accomplished visual artist and have studied the movement of animals closely since I was a very young kid. I also have been coming to the same camping area for over 40 years, so scouting fish and other wildlife in the wilderness is second nature to me. That is to say, I have exceptional eyesight, and I feel I am a better witness to an event than most others, not because of my keen eyesight, but I also have the ability to keep my calm during extraordinary situations. Having said that, in this instance, I have a fellow eyewitness, my wife of 13 years. That is the most skeptical of all people I know, so all you naysayers save it, because I live with the biggest, and she would have never believed my experience if she was not in the passenger seat beside me that night. I don't know how to categorize the creature I saw that night. What I saw was very humanoid, and that's what's so disturbing. The location was Bridgeport, California, Twin Lakes Resort, a remote fishing lodge high in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The resort sits in a valley at about 7,000 feet and in the shadow of the mighty Sawtooth Ridge, a beautiful, secluded spot with no cell phone service and tons of wildlife. I myself have seen bald and golden eagle, osprey, mountain goat, mountain lion, mountain beavers, even the rare Sierra moose. The date would have been just after Labor Day 2014, maybe September 10th, approximately 5:30 in the morning. We had just finished loading the fishing gear and we were heading to the creek for some daybreak fishing. The creek campground is about a quarter of a mile from a lake cabin. I have taken this short trip literally hundreds of times before, and it's always active with nocturnal wildlife, so we are always on high alert for regulars like mule deer, black bear, jackrabbit, and even rattlesnakes on occasion. This morning was a little foggy and still very dark. The high mountain ranges kept the valley dark from dusk till dawn. I had just passed a small trailer campground as we saw something crossing the road coming in our direction. Maybe less than 50 yards. It looked very light and very close to the ground. It was the size of a large goat, but it moved very oddly. I thought goat because quickly I remembered there were sheep herders on the side of the mountain, but I hadn't seen them for maybe 30 years. I take pride in being the first to see and identify wildlife, but this time I needed a second to figure out exactly what I was seeing. So I asked my wife in the front passenger seat, "What is that?" pointing at the thing running in our direction, that the likes of which I know I had never seen. Beforehand, I was mostly confused because its limbs were not bending or moving in the right way that a deer, bear, rabbit, cat were supposed to move. So my mind did the evaluation and spit out the answer. It's an escaped sheep or goat that had been sheared and was running for its life. So scared it didn't realize all its knees were broken and bent backwards, and not running on its hooves, feet at all. My wife could only say slowly because of disbelief, "What the hell?" When my lights came across the creature, it was crossing the street, and we got the feeling we totally surprised it. And as I turned on my high beams, as I am always ready to do with large animals on the road, it seemed to get very irritated as it turned its long, human-like neck towards us, and almost shook its head as it gave us a glare and started a double time along the road now in our direction. We were getting closer, but instead of being able to more positively ID the animal, I was only more confused, mostly because this thing's legs weren't broken at all. It was running on them like that, long, lean limbs, but it was crawling, creeping impossibly low to the ground, its torso no more than 5 inches from the ground, yet it was moving at a strangely incredible pace. I wondered first, with such long limbs, why was it so low, and not running on the bottom of its hooves or paws? How could it run so fast? The order of the feet landing was completely wrong as well, and if it was really trying to retreat quickly, it was not bounding or bouncing or swaying side to side. Its limbs moved in unison, like a crab or a spider. To be the most accurate, but without jumping to any conclusions, I would describe it as one of Hans Giger's alien creatures. As fake-looking as it might be, there was no movement in the torso, only the legs and the arms propelled it quickly along. It appeared to me to be a puppet moved by a marionette. Very bizarre. Maybe because I was so puzzled and troubled that I could not classify this animal, it kept me from flipping out. When we got close enough to see the facial features, I should describe the features that I saw clearly and up close. As I mentioned, a human torso, about 4 feet long, no tail, human-like haunches. As we passed it, I saw it was not shaved at all. It was hairless and had pale skin. Its limbs were long, thin, very defined muscles, and sinewy. Although it was crawling close to the ground, it had very large human ape-like shoulders. I've only seen such shoulders on upright walking animals. It seemed to be running on its front knuckles or claws. Imagine a sloth, but foot-long fingers or claws. The neck was thin and long, holding forward, gazing predator, not prey head. The skull had features closer to a human or ape than any canine cat rodent. The skull seemed to have a heavy protruding eye ridge and a flat curve leading to the nasal opening that you could hardly see. This I remember looking for so that I could at least classify which animal family it came from. A goat's snout or a cat or canine's nose, nothing. Just two small openings high up by the eyes. Then even stranger, the mouth. There was no long snout. This was tight-lipped, almost human mouth with a large chin that almost seemed to grin, but somehow I knew it was not a friendly grin, almost evil. But how would an animal have an evil grin? If that wasn't enough to freak us out, then came the eyes. So at first, my headlights lit this weird thing up, and as with all nocturnal animals, the first noticeable thing is the reflection of the eyes. Like all the rest of the many animals I had seen on this tiny stretch of road, their cover is blown instantly. Well, not in this case, not this time. And of all the troubling things I had observed, this probably is the most unexplainable. I was driving right into it, and I could see the eyebrow ridge. I saw deep eye sockets, but no shiny, large, or tiny eyes, just sockets. All would be revealed shortly, as I was sure to peer deep into whatever animal this was, eyes, within 15 feet. Well, when the moment of truth came, me and my wife were horrified when all we saw were deep red sockets, like the thing had no eyes, or there was a red membrane over them, something like a blind cave fish. Well, I just about drove off of the road and tried to track the thing, but something told me I was better off just watching it run in the cloud of dust into the chaparral. This friggin' thing turned its head to look at us, was grinning all with just red eye sockets, and it just zips away, never breaking its creepy crawl. So that's my experience. I've never heard of or saw this thing again, and I have no idea what it could have been. Nothing adds up. I really feel I was not supposed to see this thing. People like to say maybe it was an experiment gone wrong or a mutated, deformed animal, but what I have to say to that is this thing was not sick or dying. It was strong, aware, fast, and would kick the ass of whatever would mess with it. So, if this was a real cryptid, someone else must have seen it. Hell, it was by campsites. What would it be doing so close to humans if it depended on seclusion for survival? It doesn't add up. Was it some kind of interdimensional being that I just got lucky and saw as it slipped in and then back out to its home? This thing really looked like a monster. I believe it would be called a demon by most other people if they saw it, because it was so strange looking. Sometimes I think it was something like a ghost, maybe from a different time, but the thing is, I saw it kick up dust as it ran into the bush. So it was real, not a vision. So there you have it. Two people within 15 to 20 feet with car lights fixed on the subject for 10 to 20 seconds. No drugs or alcohol involved, no ghost stories or witchcraft talk. Just, oh my God, let's go fishing, then, oh shit, what was that? Today's second encounter. Dispatch had sent out a call asking all available units to report to the scene of a domestic dispute. A woman was calling for help, saying that her husband was going to kill her with a sword. Now, any type of law enforcement officer will tell you that these are the worst types of calls to go on. Nationwide, many officers have been shot trying to defuse such situations. So, as soon as the call came over the radio, I was on my way with 2 other units. As I arrived at the location, which was a house trailer located deep in a wooded lot, car 605 was ahead of me. We got out of the cars and went to the door with guns drawn. We could hear that there was a heated dispute still going on inside of the home. including a lot of cursing and yelling coming from the man and woman. My partner pounded on the door, shouting, "Police," while I watched, standing off to one end of the trailer home. Just after he knocked, the female voice shouted, "Good, they're here. Now you're going to jail, you low-life creep." Seconds after this, I heard a crash from the back side of the home, which was followed by the sighting of the man running out into the field while wearing nothing but a pair of shorts and sneakers. Having forced his way out, jumping through a window, I shouted to my partner that we had a runner and started in pursuit of the man just as the third unit was arriving. Upon seeing me give chase to the man, the third officer started driving out into the field with his Bronco in pursuit of the same. It had been about 4 p.m. in the afternoon when the pursuit began. As I heard over the radio, the man was unarmed. I stumbled and fell, and at the virtual same time, the Bronco reached a deep furrow that the truck couldn't cross. Now, that officer and myself were both on foot, chasing after this guy. The runner had already reached the woods, and additional backup was on its way. As the two of us joined forces, entering the forest together, we spaced ourselves about 40 yards apart and started walking in. Now, the running man going in a desolate forest wearing only a pair of shorts is not going to last real long. I must have been several hundred yards into the forest when I came across a creek, and I radioed to my partner about the find. There was a slight embankment comprised of some moist brown soil that appeared drier as you moved away from the water. After I told my partner about the creek, he moved forward, coming across it himself. This officer was now going to move easterly, looking for the tracks the man might have left while crossing the creek. I was going to follow behind him. Both of us believed that he had gone more in my partner's direction. As I was closing the gap between where I had started and where my partner had begun, I came across some gigantic impressions by the creek's edge. The impressions were so fresh they were still filling with water from the wet soil. One of them looked to be 2 or even 3 feet deep, and the prints had to be close to 2 feet long and very wide. I radioed my partner immediately, telling him to backtrack to my position. We stood there examining the tracks, and we could see one more print on the other side of the creek as well, indicating that something had crossed the creek here. Now, just so you can visualize this, the creek was about a foot deep at its deepest point, and maybe 12 feet wide in total, including several feet of bank on each side, and there was no way that these tracks were those of the man we were chasing. We both walked through the water and into the woods, following the tracks, maybe 40 feet into the woods on the other side. We found a sneaker, and at this point, there was no reason for the two of us to go any further while alone. We retreated back to the field and the trailer. Our reinforcements had already arrived, and I presented the sneaker to the wife, who confirmed it was her husband's. With the assistance of another agency, our office began a manhunt. We stalked out the various roads and areas where the man would eventually have to emerge, knowing that he couldn't last long in the woods with no clothing and one sneaker. After several days, the man had not been seen or heard or taken into custody, and the wife said that she hadn't seen him on or near the property, and neither she nor any of the relatives had heard from him. During this time, the giant impressions by the creek had been the topic of much discussion, as well as the sneaker that we had found. Some felt that the prints had been enlarged by the softness of the creek's edge, even after I had insisted that they were not, since I had seen them within moments of when they had been made. After the passage of about 2 years' time, this turned into a missing persons case. The man still not been seen in all that time. About 3 years later, some hunters came across a human skeleton about 5 miles north of where the chase had begun. They'd been hunting in some thick timber and found the bones in a patch of tangled briar. After the reports, the remains were retrieved by our forensic people. After much examination, we believed the bones belonged to our missing man. DNA was retrieved from the remaining spouse child, and it turned up as a match. The skeleton was that of the runaway man from some 3 years earlier. But here's the real clincher of the story, and why I wanted to share it anyway. According to the coroner, the man's skull had been caved in past the mid-segmental line. In other words, the head had been smashed in more than halfway by blunt force. Now, just to give you an idea of this type of force, if I was to take a full swing at your head with a large baseball bat, I couldn't even come close to this type of impact on your skull. Not even with 2 or even 3 repeated forceful blows could I create such damage. Also, numerous ribs had been broken via compound fractures. They were all clean fractures where the bones had been broken into 2 separate pieces. All of this must have occurred while the man was in the forest running and alone. Today's third encounter. As part of an upward move within the company in which I was employed, a major shipping firm whose offices were located in Kentucky, I relocated to my current home. Through a local Masonic lodge, I became acquainted with a group of men who were starting to form a cattle consortium designed to raise Black Angus cattle for the retail market. I had expressed some interest in learning about what their plans were, as well as what might be involved in becoming a partner. After a number of meetings and discussions, each of the 4 starting partners would be required to put in up to $250,000 for a total of $1 million for startup capital. Now, there is so much involved here that I could talk about. Suffice to say, we were partnering with some farmers to make use of their pastures and fields in the form of a lease so that we could raise our cattle on them. It was quite the enterprise to get started, but once all the dots were connected, we started on the road to profitable rather quickly. All of these guys, myself included, had a fair amount of business savvy. Even if we hadn't achieved success, we could have sold off our stock with no problem whatsoever. Since the market for Black Angus was exceptional in nature, I had cashed out much of my corporate stock to fund my end of the venture, and at the time in my life I was about 6 years away from my projected retirement, and thought this would be a great future investment. It turns out it was. This story actually began 7 years later, when I was a year into retirement, and one of the ranchers whose farm we were leasing had began to show a few losses of our cattle. It started some calves coming up missing, with some of them being found in the woods, badly mauled and partially eaten. As time went on, other larger cattle were being found in the pastures with enormous wounds and flesh torn out of their hides. We had all gone out personally, survey the damage that was being done to the livestock. It was the general suspicion that a bear or cougar was the culprit, which would probably have been shot to stop the mayhem. The farmer decided to hire a local hunter and both stake out and protect the herd. The herd on this farm alone represented over $1 million, and when you lose one of these animals to a predator, it represents a big hit to the pocket both now and into the future. Now, it's not like these incidents had occurred within weeks' time. They had been observed over a period of many months. 2 of these attacks had resulted in mutilation and death, and the others in injury to a still living animal. Our hired hand was patrolling the pastures on horseback, making it virtually impossible for him to be everywhere at once. And even after hiring this gentleman, one mature female and another calf had been taken under his watch. Both were found in the woods, partially eaten. One of the oddities was that none of the fences had been taken down or damaged in any way, which would indicate that something had breached it. Whatever was doing this had come over the fence and went back over the fence carrying hundreds of pounds with it, all while doing no apparent damage to the fence in the process. To date, all that the hand had seen was some bobcat and a couple coyote, none of which were capable of inflicting carnage on the herd. One night in the fall, the hand had planned to ride the pastures up until midnight. Upon our request, he was mixing up his shifts a bit in hopes of catching whatever was killing the cattle. On this day, he was riding through one pasture, heading over to check on another herd. Suddenly, he heard an uproar from the herd he had just left 10 minutes earlier. He turned his horse around and galloped back, and was shocked to see the herd huddled in one end of the pasture as he came over the hill. He immediately began to survey the pasture, and his eyes became fixed on a large mass in the middle that was not moving. As he approached the mass, he realized that he was looking at a bull lying on the grass. He began to circle it, but his horse started to buck, unwilling to continue in the area. He dismounted to discover the grim reason behind why the bull had been lying there. Its head had been torn from its body and was nowhere to be seen. He went back to the house to tell the owner of his discovery, after which they took the pickup truck and floodlight and headed back into the pasture together. When they got up to the scene, they saw something incredible. The bull's head had been torn from its shoulders, including its spinal column. It had been ripped off, not severed. This was strong, viable bull, but the most important animal in the pasture. It was, though, his prowess that the herd continued to grow, and they could not begin to even guess what had been capable of such a thing. He was worth his weight in gold, and he was now dead. A decision had to be made about how we were going to deal with this dilemma moving forward. To date, the losses were mounting into tens of thousands of dollars with no end in sight. Either whatever was doing this was going to be killed, or we would abandon this pastureland and move our herds elsewhere. So we devised a plan to stake out the acreage, with as many hired armed men as thought might be needed to kill this beast that was attacking our herd. In the end, we hired 13 men. Each were stationed in different areas, and all would be in contact via radio. We are now fully committed to killing this thing. Of the 13 men, 7 had night vision goggles or sights on their guns. The pastures were staked out for over 3 weeks, but nothing happened. It was on the 23rd night of a 24-hour stakeout that one of the men over the radio reported something running across the pasture on all fours, which looked to be a massive bear. Moments later, he was heard saying, "Oh my God, it's standing on 2 legs, and it's walking toward the herd, and it's gigantic." Seconds later, the sound of 2 rifle shots broke the silence at night. As he started shouting, "I got it! I got it!" everyone started to converge on that end of the pasture, when the hunter suddenly started shouting into the radio that the beast was running toward the fence. The search continued throughout the night for whatever he had shot, but nothing was found. He said he was able to see it clearly through his night vision scope. It was some type of massive furry beast that walked like a man after running through most of the pasture, like a bear. He said that when it was on its feet nearing the herd, he could see that it was at least twice the height of the cattle's back. After the men had been given their search their all, they called the police with nothing being found until 2 days later. On the local news, it was reported that a motorist had seen what she described as a dead big dog on the side of the highway. After hearing the report, we had made calls to the police department, but they denied there being any sort of animal they found. They said that she had seen a dead black bear and nothing more. As it turns out, after our men had put 2 rounds in this hairy beast that night, and after a woman said she saw it on the roadside, our problem ended rather abruptly. Not a single head of cattle was ever injured or found dead in the pastureland again. Today's 4th encounter. This was back in the late 60s, and my friend Bob and I had taken our dogs out on a hunting night. We were hunting coon and possum, and the dogs were well trained at treeing those animals. It was around 2 in the morning, and we hadn't had much luck. We'd walked all the way across the farmlands and ended up at the edge of a river. We decided to take a break on the river's bank and let the dogs run free for a bit, to see if they could flush anything out from hiding. We sat on the high bank overlooking the river, smoked a couple cigarettes, and just listened to the sounds of the rushing water below. After about an hour, we started getting tired and decided we better call the dogs and then start making our way back home. This is where things get real weird. First of all, when we called the dogs, they wouldn't come. Anyone who ever used hounds to hunt coon or possum knows these dogs will come when called, even if they have an animal treed. Our dogs, 4 in all, would come within maybe a couple of dozen yards from where we were standing on the riverbank, but wouldn't come any closer. We started walking down to where the dogs were, and when we came upon them, we saw that they were frightened and whimpering, and even had their tails between their legs. Now, these dogs weren't exactly ferocious like pit bulls or anything, but coonhounds tend to be very brave. I've seen several dogs who have lost chunks of their ears and have also bitten and clawed on their muzzles and snouts. Both coons and possum will put up a fight to the finish, even against creatures that are several times their size, but these dogs were scared. I mean, truly scared. And it was definitely something we were not used to seeing out of the otherwise great and valuable hunting dogs. About this time, we heard commotion on the bank by where we had just been sitting. It sounded like a large animal was coming up the bank. The dogs grew even more afraid and were now cowering behind our legs and letting out this high-pitched yelp and whine. The batteries on Bob's flashlight had already given out, but mine were still working, although somewhat dimly. I flashed the beam over the area to see what was making the noise. In the dim beam, I saw what looked to be a man, or at least the shape of one, but unlike any man I had ever seen. He would have had to have been between 8 and 9 feet tall. I called out, asking the person to identify themselves, and also stated that we were armed. This thing just stood there, as if it was eyeing us, the dogs, although now on leashes, were still making a racket and trying to pull us away. After there was no response, I fired a shot into the air. Whatever it was didn't budge, but instead let out a low, growling noise. Whatever it was sounded hostile. We tried to set the dogs on it, but that was a lost cause. The hounds were out of their minds with fear at this point, even wetting themselves. Suddenly I noticed a stench. It was the worst smell I had ever smelled. It was something like a skunk and rotten garbage. Bob and I fired 2 more shots, each one in the general direction of this creature. At this point, it let out this loud growl, which made all our hairs stand up on end. I let the dogs go, and they took off back toward our pickup, which was parked. The beast suddenly turned and jumped or dove over the bank. We heard a huge splash as it hit the water. Shaken, Bob and I decided now would be a good time to make ourselves scarce, and we headed back to the truck. We got the dogs rounded up and got out of there. I've told this story to several people, some who concluded that we ran into a bear. This doesn't sound right to me. First of all, there are no bear in this area, and certainly not any that would be that large. Furthermore, what little of it I was able to catch sight of with the flashlight, it looked more like a man, or possibly, only very big and very tall. There have been no further sightings, and I am aware in the area, but due to the size of this creature and the noises it was making, I know it was not a man or anything else. Today's final encounter. In 1997, a woman and her daughter were on vacation. and she was en route from her home in Ohio by way of Nashville, Tennessee to Nags Head, North Carolina, on the Outer Banks when she had a strange creature sighting. She had been traveling on U.S. Route 158 east from Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, toward Elizabeth City, North Carolina, which would normally take her across the Currituck Sound by way of the Wright Memorial Bridge onto the Outer Banks. However, due to road construction in the area, she had to take a detour southward toward Elizabeth City, North Carolina. After she and her daughter stopped to eat, she resumed driving. She knew that the unexpected detour was going to cause her to arrive to her destination very late that night. She believes that the detour was U.S. Route 17, which carried her about 30 miles southward to another route which crossed over the Albemarle Sound and connected her to U.S. Route 64 east. She then followed the route through the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, crossed the bridge over Alligator River, crossed the bridge over Croton Sound, and then arrived on Roanoke Island. One final bridge across Roanoke Sound took her to her final destination, at her vacation home in Nags Head. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and the roadway was dark as she and her daughter, asleep in the back seat, traveled along toward her destination. She didn't know her exact location, but she knew that she was just gone past Red Wolf Crossing sign along the side of the road just minutes before. That would have placed her in the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge because Red Wolf warning signs were placed along a 10-mile stretch of U.S. Route 64 back in '87, when the federal government reintroduced the red wolf, or Canis rufus, species to the area and created the Red Wolf Recovery Area. While driving along the stretch of road, a large black creature with short fur jumped out in front of her car. The creature was about 6 feet tall, stood on its hind legs, was well-muscled, had a blunt nose, shorter than a canine, and kind of like a cat, had pointed ears, and it had a long, thin tail. In some ways, the animal was cat-like, with large legs shaped like those of a cat or a dog. She later commented that the creature had the torso much like a man. The creature may have been on all 4 legs. When she approached it, it stood in the front of her car as she braked to stop. It stood in the front of her headlights for a moment, and then it took a power leap and jumped completely across both lanes of the road. It is thought that the jump of that distance was at least 18 feet. She stated that it was not a red wolf or even a black wolf, but that it was something else. She discussed the encounter with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they led her in a different direction by trying to convince her that what she saw was a dog, a feral dog, or a hybrid wolf. She didn't go along with that theory. Her final decision was she believes that she saw a Dogman. Alright folks, some just absolutely terrifying experience. That first experience just is very unsettling. I repeat, I do not, and hopefully will never encounter a crawler or a feral person. Both absolutely terrify me, and I don't know why. I've had my experience in '94 with a dogman, actually with multiple dogmen in the woods with 4 of my friends. Thank God we were not hurt and we were okay. But to me, these creatures that are just either a creation from this evil international government that really runs the show with the alien agenda, or possibly some sort of, I don't know, throwback best word I can think. I despise these things. To me, they just terrify me. And, I think a lot of that comes from watching the movie Chud from when I was a little boy. My parents had HBO, and, in the 80s, they had their little beer parties on the back porch. And, 6-year-old Jeff was left to his own devices, and there I'd be lying on the couch watching HBO at 9 p.m. And one night, what came on but Chud. And I'll tell you what, I have not been the same since. Anyway, guys, thank you for supporting this channel. Your support is what makes this channel special and what continues to make it grow and go. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their life sometime. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless you all.